North Carolina teachers are choosing to stay in their jobs. That is the analysis of the John Locke Foundation's Terry Stoops, our education expert, who writes that we really should be pleased that the statewide teacher attrition rate is dropping. He says not only does that mitigate turnover costs, but it also suggests that the investments made by the Republican-led General Assembly are beginning to pay off. Terry Stoops joins me now. Terry, welcome back to the show.
Thank you.
So the narrative over a number of years now has been that teachers are fleeing North Carolina in droves because they don't like the Republicans leading the General Assembly. But this latest data from the state shows a pretty different story the last several years.
Yeah, that's right. And the North Carolina Department of Public Instruction is required to publish a report called the State of the Teaching Profession every year and submit it to the General Assembly. And this report, which was redesigned about 5 years ago, provides details about, very basic details about teacher attrition and mobility. Attrition being teachers that leave the profession, and mobility, teachers that move from one job in public school to another. And really, attrition is what the focus should be. And when you look over the last 5 years, teacher attrition has fallen significantly in North Carolina. 5 years ago, we had an attrition rate of 9%. And the last school year, it has it reached 7.53%. So that is a 1.5 percentage point drop in teacher attrition, and that is an amazing feat to be able to retain more teachers in just a span of 5 years is really a significant turn of events.
Does the report give any insight about why the teachers are leaving or why they left?
Very basic insight. The teachers self-report using existing categories to describe why they're leaving. So if they left their position to get a teaching job in another state, for example, if they left due to some other family circumstance, or if they're moving, or if their Teach for America term has expired. There's categories for each of these, and just as in every other year, the highest proportion of teachers that leave the profession are those that retire, either with full or partial benefits. Typically, about a quarter of the teachers that leave the profession in a given year retire. And one may say, well, there's not much we can do about that as the state. If a teacher wants to retire, they can retire. And so the focus really should be on those categories of attrition that the state may be able to do something about. And these are teachers that are dissatisfied with their job or are leaving their job for some other type of work. That's not always a bad thing. Sometimes teaching is a bad fit for some folks, so we'd want them to go explore other opportunities. But there are times where teachers leave the profession and they were otherwise outstanding teachers, and if given the right incentives, would have stayed in their position, but unfortunately decided to leave.
I take it then that in this state report, there's no box that a teacher can check to say, yeah, I don't like the Republicans in the General Assembly, so I'm leaving the profession. Nothing like that, even though we have seen and heard that narrative for a number of years now. Okay, so that's attrition. You mentioned early on the issue of mobility, teachers moving from one district to another district within our state. Is that prevalent?
Not really, and mobility really needs to be understood in terms of school districts competing for talent. And that's really what we want as a state, is that school districts should be competing for talent and trying to create the conditions necessary to recruit the best teachers to their district. We often look down upon a district like Wake, which is able to pay its teachers more than, say, surrounding districts in Johnston or Harnett County. But we want this constant push and pull for districts because we want them to compete for that very small pool of talent that sometimes exists for certain areas. So we're looking at about a 4% rate of mobility, and that's been pretty consistent across the years. So mobility isn't a big part of what happens with teachers in a given year. There are districts that complain about mobility because there are costs associated with mobility. Obviously, you do have to find a new teacher to replace the one, but there is no cost to the state in the sense that a teacher is leaving the profession altogether.
Speaking of costs, you write in your piece, which folks can read at johnlocke.org, about the attrition, that when it's lower, that helps to mitigate the cost, because teaching is like any other industry, frankly. When someone leaves, you have all of that knowledge loss that goes with them. You have to hire someone, retrain them, etc. And I don't often hear a lot of discussion of that. Talk a little bit about those costs associated with a teacher leaving.
Yeah, well, the costs vary significantly. So if you're replacing a teacher with someone that's just out of university, the cost is going to be much higher because there's additional training that needs to occur than if you have a seasoned teacher moving from one school district to another, or moving from one state into North Carolina. So the costs vary significantly, and that cost is really borne by the school districts. There's no good calculation right now to determine how much they cost that they actually bear for recruitment of new teachers, for training new teachers. So there's not a good estimate that I could give. But districts would probably be good to report that data if they did have it, to talk about what some of the costs are. Now, one of the benefits to attrition is the fact that the teachers leaving are typically, and we don't have it in this report, but they're typically of lower quality than the teachers that stay in the profession. We know from analysis done by the Department of Public Instruction that the growth scores of teachers that leave the profession in North Carolina are typically lower than those that stay in the profession. And so the cost to replace that teacher is borne by the school district, but the students may actually benefit by having a bad teacher leave the district, leave the profession, and be presumably replaced with a better one.
Terry, the Republican leadership in the General Assembly has for a number of years now been focusing intently on K-12 education in all sorts of different ways, policy decisions as well as things like teacher pay, increasing teacher pay multiple times. Give us a sense of how teachers have improved on their pay and benefits over the past half dozen years or so.
Well, we've seen significant increases in teacher pay. The average teacher pay has increased by around 21% since 2014. So, and benefits are increasing right along with it. So we're seeing significant increases in pay and benefits. And this is what always gets me about this report when it comes out, is that if I was a member of the opposition, if I was a Democrat or a member of the North Carolina Association of Educators, I would say, look, our attrition rate is decreasing because teacher pay keeps going up. And I would be making that connection, even though, we would have to do more research to determine whether there really is a connection between teacher pay and the attrition rate. But that's not what they say, of course. So we can assume that one of the reasons why teachers are staying in the profession is because increased pay. The report doesn't necessarily point to that, but I think it's a pretty good idea about why a lot of teachers decide to stay in North Carolina public schools.